Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank sincerely Amanda and her colleagues in the Bureau for the invitation to come and give this talk. I called it Closing the Gaps because in the correspondence I had with Amanda, and when I studied a little what was happening with the Bureau, I could see a lot of interest and even strong focus on, for example, closing the gaps between industry, the needs of industry, the manufacturing sectors, and the role of the Bureau. It was also clear there was a need to improve or upgrade the testing equipment, and there was a clear gap there as well. In fact, personally, I'm amazed the equipment is still working after 30 years, which is, says something for how the Bureau and the other people involved have kept it going. So when I was asked to do this, though, I was puzzled why me, because I'm not an expert in standardization. Certainly, I worked closely many years ago with the Bureau, with ESCOM, in setting up procedures for high voltage testing in the country, but I wasn't at all sure why it was still, my experience was still relevant. But people like Chris and Amanda helped me understand that it could be helpful. My role for the last 25 years has been in global industrial business, and I've been involved in the management of industrial manufacturing in over 50 countries around the world. A very challenging process, many of them emerging countries, developing industries, and the one common language that we had in this whole business, in the manufacturing and delivering and selling of equipment, was standards, common standards. So I am highly convinced of the importance of standards, of standardization, as the vehicle for meaningful trade, commerce, the whole interaction between manufacturing and the markets lies through the language and the framework of standards. And I thought this friendly gentleman might just be a reminder. He is really the father of Kaizen, the Japanese philosophy of total quality management. He, amongst others, trained the Americans into total quality management, and we had high respect for the value of total quality management. So in trying to think how to put this talk together, I thought it might be helpful to show a quick roadmap, starting with how did things work back then in this ancient time in the last century, when none of us had gray hair, but we were young men. Unfortunately, no women, would have been more fun, and developing what we did. So I will start with a brief flashback on the history. I will look at how I see the broad picture now, and what I see as the opportunities out there, where things are going from an international and local perspective. Change management I see as a vital process in all of this. Business is always about people. And if you want people to do something different, it involves change management. And collaboration is something I believe in very strongly. So I have this roadmap, and in a way I'm also using it a little bit as a checklist against the planning that I understand the DTI in this country and the Bureau of Standards want to go. So looking back at the past, we started in the early 70s with something called the High Voltage Coordinating Committee. And this was a small meeting of people led by the CSIR, but the universities were represented, the technical departments of electrical engineering. The SABS was a key member, and at that time the leader in high voltage facilities in the country. And we had industry involved through representatives from industry. And our role was to view what was evolving in the country in the high voltage direction, and to start to plan facilities in a coordinated way, not that everybody went off on the individual tracks, but that we invested in equipment in a reasonably intelligent way. And one of the strengths of this committee from the beginning is that these people came together. We had research people talking to testing people, manufacturing, guiding us in where to go. Collaboration started at that point. It was also an exciting time to be in electrical engineering because this was the time where high voltage and even more 800 kV transmission was in discussion, in planning, in early design. There was a huge need for a lot of high voltage testing and for background research behind that, because South Africa at the high altitude that we have in many parts of the country involves different conditions for high voltage application. So it was a good time to be moving in this area. We had a growing economy and still in a growing electricity demand. So it was fun as well. And in this way, we had relevance clearly in what this committee was talking about. It wasn't just a bunch of talking heads, but we were excited and moving forward on relevant work for the country. And we were learning at the same time. In fact, as a brief aside, the first time I went out to NETFA, it was nothing more than a bare piece of felt with the beginnings of the Cobora Bassa terminal station being built up. And the 400 kV transmission already existed. And the first collaborative project that we worked on was with the Bureau and Eskom and the university, because we wanted to understand how lightning surges on the 400 kV transmission traveled and what happened to those surges when they traveled and how far did they travel. And so I, as a young engineer, climbed the 400 kV masts and mounted antenna on the masts, and the Bureau came and put their then high voltage impulse generator at the bottom of the mast, well, in fact, a few hundred meters away. Eskom gave us the permission to do all these things, and we impulsed that line. We put high voltage surges on that line, and then we had a caravan that drove along the 400 kV line right up toward Palaboa somewhere, and we measured those surges as they traveled. So we had a lot of fun doing that, and we learned a lot already, and we learned already the early stages of the effect of corona on those surges, which is the field that Tony Burton became an international specialist in. So we had collaboration and interesting things. But we also, through the fact that we had research and university people there, and senior executives in Eskom and the Bureau supporting what we were doing, we had a lot of contact with what was happening internationally. And in that way, we could reinforce the relevance of what we were doing. And the result of this collaboration then was that CSR built a high voltage research laboratory for the early stages of research on the effect of the atmosphere on high voltage insulation. But the specification of our equipment was defined by this committee, and Eskom and the bureaus determined the parameters for the major laboratory out at NETFA and the equipment that went into that. And certainly I was one of the people involved in the design of NETFA, even that building. And after some years of experience and the research, so we also supported the move of the CSR equipment to reinforce what was out at NETFA. So the key to good progress and success in that time was this collaboration with all these parties involved and the relevance. So that's the history. That was another century. And in thinking about this talk, then I had to think about what is the picture now? What do we know about the situation here? Living in Switzerland, I follow South Africa very closely, but I don't have the detailed picture. I have seen that the electro-technical sector here is very substantial in its scope and in its value to the economy of the country, but it's also in a shrinking phase at the moment. It's also clear when you look at rankings of South Africa in the context of other international rankings, then in terms of technical readiness, South Africa is in a middle group. It's about halfway up in the scale of countries. And in terms of competitiveness, globally, South Africa is way down in the scale. This is not depressing, this is opportunity, because it's much easier to move forward when you're not already close to the top. And for me, this is in fact where it all should start, this focus on reversing the slide in the economy and really moving forward with strong focused actions. One of the reports I saw here which really gave me concern was a report from the DTI on skills. And it was sad to see that the skill levels available to the industry here need a lot of upliftment. The DTI put out a very comprehensive survey of this only about a year ago, and is committing itself to action in this, which I believe is massively important for what needs to be done in the country. So in broadening my view on the picture, I wanted to understand the economic environment, how does industry see the Bureau, is high voltage even relevant in today's modern world? I haven't touched an impulse generator for 25 years, and I wanted to know what is the international context here. How is the market developing, and where are the directions going? So I drew on background information. The DTI put out a very comprehensive policy action plan, which for me was important to study. It described not only the history of the last 10 years in the country's economy and the industrial sectors of it, but also the forward planning for the next 5 to 10 years. I also studied the SABS's corporate plan, which I found extremely good, extremely useful, and in fact, frankly, very honest in the own assessment of where they stand, what are the issues, and where should they be going. I also looked into the Electro-Technical Export Council and how they see themselves and see industry and the role in both in the local economy and in export. And all of this was extremely helpful for me to set the scene for some of the comments I'm going to bring. And the common factor in all of this is this massive need for growth in industry and a need to really push for change across it. Looking into the Bureau's corporate plan, they did a comprehensive SWOT analysis of themselves. In fact, they also did a pestle analysis, which is, you don't meet that often. It was a very healthy exercise to see. Congratulations to your team on doing that. And they saw for themselves how they find themselves in this challenging environment. They find the competitiveness of that environment complicated. Their mandate has changed, and this has had consequences which the industry itself has felt the impact of. And they recognize that the customer expectations, despite all these issues, are clearly unchanged and have probably even increased. And the implications are, in moving forward and in meeting the objectives that the DTI and then the country's industry are requiring, the testing infrastructure really needs to be upgraded. It's reached a tipping point for renewal. The SABS has to find its way through this different landscape, and they recognize, which I thought was really positive, that the rate of change that they themselves need to work on must be faster than the already high rate of change externally. This is an honest assessment of an organization and a clear commitment on moving forward. So in my checklist thinking and approach, this for me was already a positive step. I looked and had questions myself about the relevance of high voltage testing, and I needed to bring myself up to date on the international status. And the IEEE and the IEC, through the support of SIGRE, have done a very comprehensive report a few years ago on the past experience and the future of high voltage testing and high power testing. And they reached this plain conclusion that there is a need to do more, that we haven't learned and understood everything, methods need to be worked on, need to be improved. It is clear directions to move forward on. And as a result, SIGRE has a new working group which has to run until 2020, which is examining the overvoltage characteristics of all power system equipment from the end of medium voltage right up to UHV. So it reinforces the previous conclusion, which is there's plenty more work to do and there's high relevance for ongoing work and up-to-date modern facilities. So everything here, again, from my simple checkpoint point of view, is this is the right way to go, and an important facility like NETFA and the role of the SABS is here for me reinforced. Competition was an issue raised by the Bureau in their own self-assessment, so I asked myself, what is going on here? It's easy to find out where all the other labs are. This is just a snapshot out of a survey, and it's clear that competition is here very alive and well. And for me, that's an excellent sign. Having worked in global business for 20 years, competition is a total pain in the neck. But it's vital to keep the whole sector alive. It keeps you on your toes. It supports innovation. And so if there's competition, there's every more reason to be active yourself in that field. Of course, in thinking about the upgrading of the facilities, the Bureau can certainly be learning from what other labs are doing. I see two of my old company's labs are also involved here in high voltage and high power. So this again for me is another positive reason to upgrade, reinforce and make sure that NETFA here plays a vital role in the electro-technical sector and in advancing the economy and in this area. So far, from my point of view, there's a very positive background to the context of this workshop. There's been serious analyses done by the Department of Trade and Industry, by the Bureau. There is this need for growth. There's plenty of scope for improvement in the rankings and in the need for training. And the specialized testing, big facilities are highly relevant. Standards are even more relevant today than before. And there's a lively market. So what are the future directions and what are the opportunities that are coming our way? And here too, the Bureau has indicated in their business plan some directions that they see. And from my point of view, this is one of the most exciting times to be an electrical engineer. If you take what is going on in the utility world, the world of generating electricity and delivering it to industry, to consumers, we're going through a massive, massive transformation. We're leaving behind us these good old days where it was a simple system. We had generation, transmission, consumption, and at the distribution end, it was a one-way delivery. The power utilities took captive customers at the other end. Tariffs were locked up in a positive way, even lifted by inflation, and money went back to the utility. It was a nice world to be an engineer, and it worked well. And it's worked for 100 years. And now we're going through a massive, massive transformation, which is becoming the world of the end user. We're leaving the world of the generator and the power company, and we're moving into the world of the end user. And in our own analyses, working with utilities in Europe or the States, we actively talk about a new world because there are two major processes happening here. It's a world where it starts with the end user, down in the distribution environment, and right at the end, far away, is the remaining generation. And there are two major issues here. The one is the penetration of renewable energy resources everywhere. That's the one new in this new world. And it's right down, and even more so, highly distributed in the distribution environment, to the point of the individual customer, the individual factory, the roofs of the parking lots. It's, in a way, the socialization of electrical generation, because every house can do it. I have solar panels on the roof of my own house, and I can look at my telephone and see today how much electricity I'm generating. And this world is made possible by the second new, which is Industry 4. It's the world of digitalization. It's the world of automation. And there are many new business models emerging in this world. So the future of electrical engineering is changing. The role of industry is changing because this new world brings many new business models, new opportunities for business, new opportunities for innovation, and being electro-technical, it will require testing and it will require standards. In the Bureau's business plan, they put a focus on a number of directions in a turnaround strategy that they're working on. And the one is to upgrade the aging infrastructure in the country, with a particular focus I see in the DTI plan in high voltage switchgear. So highly relevant, because in this new world there will be a need for much more switchgear. And they're putting a focus on digitalization. I was happy to see that, because this is where the future is going. So smart energy is absolutely a key direction in the future. They also mentioned, though, Industry 4, they mentioned low voltage DC, and they mentioned the small medium enterprise business environment. So I wanted to have a quick look at this as well. And it's easy to see that standardization is moving strongly in these directions. This is just a quick extract on the work or the focus of the IEC, on the Internet of Things, on artificial intelligence. This is seen as the future, the way to go, the factory of the future. And here standardization is no longer just the process of product standardization, but it's moving also into the system level, the process level, which adds a new challenge into the process of standards. But the IEC is already moving forward in this. There's plenty to learn here from what they are doing. This is just a quick snapshot of how standards are in a relatively complex stage of development in smart manufacturing. Multiple bodies are taking place, participating here, industry groups, industry associations in different parts of the world. But the IEC is supporting bundling this together as well. Low voltage DC is one you don't hear too often yet, and yet it's a very logical field to be moving into. First of all, in the electrification side, renewables, photovoltaic, you generate at low voltage DC. And if you think of the rural parts of Africa, there are some good benchmarks already active in Kenya and Tanzania and some of the other Eastern African countries, where rural communities are putting up panels for themselves or being supported through NGO work and creating small microgrids for themselves in low voltage DC. And of course, on the smart end of it, computers, telephone chargers, retail apparatus at home, a lot of it is already operating or fundamentally operates at low voltage DC. And here too, the IEC has recognized this, and it's seen as shown in their own documentation as an electricity direction for the future. This doesn't mean the end of AC, not at all. But what is coming down the road is a two-system type of approach to electrification. The small medium enterprise business is the backbone of economies around the world. And I was really concerned to see in a newspaper headline recently one of the business studies out here suggesting that South Africa is completely out of step here. If you compare the findings of South Africa against the OECD world, we see similarly about 90% of business is running at the SME level, but the actual employment of people in South Africa in SME business is very thin, is very low. That implies the SMEs are very small, are not growing enough. And there really is a need to understand why and how to push that. And equally through that, they are not a strong force in the economy that they should be. So clearly scope for improvement here. And here too, the standardization world is doing a lot to promote and support SMEs. Senelec in Europe has a whole focus on this, and they see the role of SME participation in the shaping of standards as a competitive advantage for the SMEs. So they're encouraging active collaboration here between the SME industries which of course is a multitude of industries, and the standardization activities. So too, I see this as a positive opportunity. So on my checkpoint, the choice of these themes makes total sense for where the future is going, in addition to reinforcing the existing industrial economy. A further point that the Bureau focus on, and this workshop here today is an illustration of that, is customer centricity. I was happy to see this because, as I said earlier, business is about people, and it's the people are the customers. And if you don't focus on your customers, you might as well not be in business or providing services. It's a major challenge, customer centricity. Having worked in the marketing and selling and production of equipment around the world, it is the fundamental basis of everything you do. And there's a simple logic to it. You need, if you're providing a service or product, you need to first of all identify who are my customers and why are they my customers. It's not a question of going out and saying, I've got nice stuff, you must buy my stuff. You need to understand why have they chosen to be your customer, and why do they actually want to buy what you have? What do they value in what you're bringing? And in the environment that the Bureau is working in, where their customers is the industrial economy, the manufacturing economy, you all have your customers. And why do you have your customers? And what do your customers value in what you are doing? And the Bureau, as a service provider in all of that, need to understand that logic as well. It's a simple logic, but it's something that many people in business totally neglect or ignore. They start with the technology view. I have some really great boxes that you should be buying. And they neglect the values that customers are looking for. And as we move in the electrical industry into this end-user empowered world, where people sitting in a house can generate their own electricity, they're going to have a very different attitude to the services you offer them. So this is, for me, the essence of customer centricity, and it requires a very tough change in culture. And that process of change is itself extremely difficult and demanding. This is a simple illustration of it. And it involves, for the people in the process of change, going through real emotional difficulties, and people react very differently from one another in how they accept or deal or reject change. Change is a scary process. We all like to live in our own comfort zone, and change involves moving out of our comfort zone. And some people might welcome that if they felt they've been kind of blocked in their business from really doing what they think they need to do, but others will react with a lot of fear or totally reject it, dig their heels in and block it. And gradually as you move through it, it can get tougher, you can get depressed, you can walk out of it, you can leave it, or you can start to see the real opportunity for it. And it's a process that needs time, and people need to be helped in their way through this emotional process. And in our work, where we had to deal with these challenges in a lot of countries, trying to harmonize a business, imagine trying to bring people from 50 different countries together who can't even speak a common language, and try to get them to harmonize in one way of doing business. It's not easy, and we had to be very structured in it. And we found at that time a process that this particular guy, John Cotter, put together as a simple but highly structured way of moving. We found this very useful. So I bring this simply as an example. The consultants around the world love to help people with change management. But you have to be careful, because there are different ways to try and take this on, and we certainly found this systematic way, where you don't move from one step to another till you've really completed it, makes a lot of sense. But you have to be careful at the same time. There are definitely some risks in the process of change management. It's easy to slide into bureaucracy. This is a survey that was made by the Harvard Business Review amongst about 7,000 industries around the world, businesses around the world. and they saw which functions in a business were the ones that the people working there were experiencing as getting more and more bureaucratic with time. And the red arrows here tend to be those activities which have something to do with customer centricity. So be very careful as you drive change and as you work on customer centricity not to go down this road of increasing bureaucracy. Standard organizations tend to be bureaucratic at the best of times. Industry, if it's innovative and dynamic, doesn't like bureaucracy. It likes to move fast and be dynamic. And to bring these two together and make them work positively means respect for each other's needs. And in changing, one often starts to draw up new rules and procedures and documents which end up being bureaucratic. The key lessons in change management, from my point of view, is not to be top-down. You cannot tell a person you have to change. You have to involve the people in change from the beginning. They must be part of the process, part of the discussion. They need to understand why should we be changing and where should we be going. And that involvement at the beginning in helping that understanding develop is the key first step to the process. If you don't get through this step positively, the rest won't work properly. When you've passed the stage of understanding and people are now getting interested in it, then you involve them in how they're going to change. How are we going to do things differently? Again, you don't tell them top down. You involve them in that process. Because then they understand and then they're more excited because they're able to shape their own future. It's again a very democratic process. It takes time, it takes careful management, it needs leadership. And as you move forward, you keep it moving, you keep it dynamic by following up all the time, or involving them and follow up, doing measurements, measuring the progress. Of course, you look for innovation, you look for technology to leverage, but in the end, technology can only be an enabler, and you still need smart people to understand and to help where it goes. So, collaboration can certainly work effectively and is absolutely needed in this relationship between standards and industry. This is an example I took from the German Standards Institute, where they have set up a roadmap for themselves on how they're going to move and promote and support Industry 4. And they have a well-structured approach. And interesting for me here is the way they bring together research, innovation, manufacturing, all together in that process of moving toward Industry 4. And they do this not just because it's something nice to do, but because through that they see that they can speed up the process of coming to market with industry, for industry, and in that way also support the whole thing with a fast development of the standards. And what I really liked here is these are the same three parties that were right back there 30 years ago working together in our High Voltage Coordinating Committee. We had this collaboration just by good luck back then, and it worked for us back then. When I had a quick look with Google, of course you can look at all kinds of things and also see a lot of garbage, but I saw some examples of useful building blocks emerging here, which I think can be brought together. We have the CSR and ESCOM doing things together. We have the Institute supporting with training and maintaining professional engineering standards. We have the Export Council. And then especially we have the African standardization organizations across the continent as a way to move things forward. What I missed in what I saw so far was the Bureau in collaborative activities, and so this workshop makes perfect sense. And I do believe with all the new tools available to us, there can be smarter ways to collaborate than sitting as a committee as we did back then 30 years ago. I happened to be the secretary of this committee and always had to take the minutes, which was painful. So smart partnerships, I believe, are the way to the future. And the harmonization of standards across Africa and the leadership role of South Africa, South African industry, South African standardization, the Bureau, is a massive opportunity, and there's a powerful case for it. With the free trade agreements being signed now by most of the countries, with the countries moving through their process of ratification, this is a great opportunity to move forward. And I was pleased to see in one of the Bureau reports that the energy sector here was being seen as one of the key areas to move in. So in going through my own sort of study and checklist of what's happening and who's doing what, I absolutely see a positive framework for collaboration. We've seen this strong drive. We see that the opportunities are there. So I believe this workshop is the right place to start the dialogue. Chris has reinforced that as well. Any dialogue between stakeholders and interested parties must revolve around expectations. And here too, this should be done in a very open way. There are some basic questions that you have to arrive at answers on. Who should be doing what better? How to do that better? Why should we be doing this better? And with whom should we be doing it? There's a bundle of questions here which in a really positive working dialogue one goes around on until you really have got answers that you agree on, and out of which that becomes the platform for the actions that follow. And the actions really are the ultimate key of all of this. It's easy to talk about things, but the actions are what matter. And this really brings me back to my beginning, because progress doesn't actually happen until you start doing something about it. So thank you very much, and I wish you good luck as you take this forward.